Welcome to Mr. Yogi Pod channel. Before we begin, grab a notebook or open your favorite notes app. If you hear a word you don't know, make sure to write it down. Later, look it up and try using it in your daily conversations. Ready to sharpen your listening skills? Let's get started.
Hey everybody, ready for a deep dive into something pretty different.
Different good, hopeful.
Oh, definitely good. We're talking about depression today, but not the way you usually hear about it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we've got this ebook here all about psychoneuroimmunology.
Say that 5 times fast.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I'm still working on
Me
it.
too.
But it's a pretty fascinating concept when you break it down.
It is. It's basically a way of looking at how your mind, your immune system and depression all fit together. Like they're all connected.
Totally. So we're not just talking about what's going on in your head, we're looking at the whole body.
Exactly.
And what I think is really neat about this ebook is that it gets into some specific things that play a role.
Yeah, like what?
Well, like these things called cytokines. Have you heard about these?
Oh, yeah. They're little messengers in your immune system, right?
Right. And then there's tryptophan. You know, like the thing in turkey that makes you sleepy after Thanksgiving dinner.
That's the one.
It's all connected.
It is. The interesting thing here is this. We're kind of moving beyond just thinking about neurotransmitters being out of balance, like serotonin. You know,
Right.
this ebook is saying, hey, maybe inflammation caused by your immune system could actually be a big part of what's going on with depression, too.
Okay, yeah, I'm definitely intrigued.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me more about these cytokines then. How do they fit into all of this?
So basically, you can think of cytokines as messengers, like little signals that tell your body what to do when it's dealing with stuff like stress or infections.
Okay.
And what the ebook points out is that a lot of times people who have depression actually have higher levels of certain cytokines.
Really?
Yeah, even when they're not sick.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's like their bodies are basically sending out these constant stress signals, even if there's no obvious reason for it.
So it's like their immune system is sort of stuck in overdrive even when they're not actually fighting anything off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And being in that constant state of alert can actually lead to more inflammation throughout the whole body.
Oh.
And the ebook suggests that that inflammation might actually be contributing to their depression.
Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, it makes you think about depression in a totally different light.
Right.
Yeah. So where does tryptophan fit into all of this then? I mean, I know it's an amino acid, and I've heard it's linked to serotonin, but I don't really get how it all works together.
Well, tryptophan is actually what your body uses to make serotonin.
Oh, okay.
So it's like the building block, the raw material.
Got it.
But here's where it gets interesting. This ebook explains that when you have chronic inflammation, it can actually deplete your body's tryptophan levels. And that means your body has a harder time making serotonin.
Oh, so it's like the inflammation is stealing away the stuff our bodies need to make us feel good.
It's kind of like that, yeah.
No wonder people with depression often feel so low on energy and motivation. It's like they're running on empty.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
And to make things even worse, inflammation can also mess with how effectively the serotonin you do have is working.
So it's like a double whammy.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so we've got inflammation messing with our mood chemicals and stealing away the stuff to make more. That's pretty crazy. But I'm also curious about this HPA axis thing you mentioned before. What role does that play in all this mind-body stuff we're talking about?
Well, the HPA axis is basically your body's stress response system. You know, like when you're about to give a big presentation and your heart starts racing, that's your HPA axis kicking in.
Right.
It's releasing a hormone called cortisol to help you deal with the stress.
Okay, yeah. Cortisol is like our built-in alarm system, right?
Exactly.
But what happens when that alarm keeps going off, even when there's no real danger?
That's when things can start to go a little haywire. What this ebook explains is that chronic stress can actually lead to having chronically high levels of cortisol. And those high cortisol levels, well, they can actually damage certain parts of the brain.
Oh, wow.
And you guessed it, high cortisol can make inflammation worse too.
So it's like a vicious cycle then. Stress leads to high cortisol leads to more inflammation, and then more inflammation makes the depression worse. And round it goes.
Exactly. And this is where the whole psychoneuroimmunology approach gets really interesting. It's not just about trying to treat the symptoms of depression.
Right.
It's about trying to understand and address those underlying imbalances in your immune system and your HPA axis.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I'm curious about something.
Yeah. What's that?
How does the ebook actually connect all of this to major depressive disorder specifically?
Well, it goes into quite a bit of detail about the different types of depression and,
No.
their characteristics. I
In
mean, you've
case.
probably heard of dysthymia, right?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah.
Rings a bell. But maybe you could refresh my memory a little bit.
Okay, sure. It's basically a form of depression that's less intense than major depressive disorder, but it lasts for a longer time.
Okay.
And the ebook suggests that these different types of depression, well, they might actually involve different variations in how those cytokines, tryptophan, and the HPA axis all play together.
So the same underlying mechanisms might be happening, but they could show up in different ways depending on the type of depression.
That's the idea, yeah. But to really understand how psychoneuroimmunology applies to major depressive disorder specifically, we should probably take a step back and look at the kind of classic understanding of what that actually is.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Oh.
What are some of the typical, signs and symptoms that someone might be dealing with if they have major depressive disorder?
Well, basically, the ebook defines it as a mood disorder marked by persistent sadness and loss of interest in things, plus a whole bunch of other symptoms that can really impact your everyday life.
So it's not just feeling down in the dumps for a few days. It's something more, much more intense and debilitating.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We're talking about, like, significant changes in appetite or how much you sleep,
Oh,
feeling worthless or guilty a lot of the time, having trouble concentrating, and even sometimes thoughts of death or suicide.
wow, yeah. That's a pretty heavy list.
Yeah.
So how do doctors actually figure out if someone has major depressive disorder? Is it just based on what they tell the doctor, or are there like tests involved?
There isn't really like one single test for depression, like a blood test or something.
Okay.
Doctors mostly rely on a few different things together. Like they'll talk to you in detail about your symptoms,
Yeah.
how long you've had them and how much they're actually affecting your life.
So it's really about the severity and the impact, not just, having a few bad days.
Yeah, exactly. They'll also look at your medical history, see if there's any family history of mental health issues, and they'll want to rule out any other medical conditions that could be causing your symptoms.
This is like a detective, trying to piece everything together.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Okay.
And just like detectives, doctors actually use a specific set of guidelines to make a diagnosis. The most common ones are from what's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM-5 for short.
Ah, the famous DSM. I've heard of that.
Yep, that's the one. It's basically like the go-to handbook for mental health diagnoses.
Okay.
So to be diagnosed with major depressive disorder, according to the DSM-5, you need to have at least 5 very specific symptoms almost every day for at least 2 weeks.
Okay, so what are the criteria?
Well, first, there's having a depressed mood most of the day, almost every day. This can be like feeling sad or empty or hopeless.
Right, that makes sense. It's kind of like the core of depression, isn't it?
Yeah, you could say that. Next, there's this loss of interest or pleasure in almost all activities, pretty much all day, every day. And there's actually a term for it, anhedonia. It's that feeling of just, not enjoying the things you used to love.
Oh, like when you just can't find the joy in anything.
Exactly. Another common symptom is having significant weight loss or weight gain when you're not actually trying to change your weight, or a big change in your appetite almost every day.
So it's not just stress eating. It could also be like completely losing your appetite.
Yeah, that's right. Then there's insomnia or hypersomnia almost every day. So either having trouble sleeping or sleeping way too much.
Oh, yeah. I've been there. Tossing and turning all night or just wanting to sleep the day away.
Yeah, it's not fun. What else? Oh, right. Another symptom is what's called psychomotor agitation or retardation almost every day. So, either feeling really restless and fidgety or feeling slowed down and sluggish.
It's like your body can't keep up with your mind, or it just feels weighed down by all the sadness.
You got it. And then there's feeling fatigued or lacking energy almost every day.
Yeah, that feeling of being completely drained, even without doing anything physically demanding.
Exactly. There are also feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt almost every day. Like your inner critic just won't shut up.
Oh, yeah.
Then there's having trouble thinking, concentrating, or making decisions almost every day.
Like your brain is foggy and you can't even handle simple choices.
Exactly. And finally, there are recurring thoughts of death, suicidal thoughts, or even having a plan for suicide.
Okay, yeah. That's a serious one. And, it's crucial to remember that suicidal thoughts are really a sign to get professional help right away.
Absolutely. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, Please reach out to a crisis hotline or a mental health professional immediately.
Right.
There's help available, and you don't have to go through this alone.
That's such an important reminder. So to sum it all up, to be diagnosed with major depressive disorder, someone needs to have at least 5 of these symptoms. They have to be going on for at least 2 weeks, and they have to be, seriously impacting their life.
That's right. And it's crucial to remember that depression can look different in everyone.
Hmm.
Not everyone experiences all of those symptoms, and the intensity can vary a lot from person to person.
It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Exactly. And how depression shows up can also depend on things like age, gender, and cultural background.
Okay, yeah. That's really helpful context. So how does psychoneuroimmunology fit into all of this then? How does it actually explain all these different symptoms of major depressive disorder?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. The ebook suggests that the interplay of those cytokines, tryptophan, and the HPA axis, the stuff we were talking about earlier, well, it could actually be driving these very symptoms.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's unpack how psychoneuroimmunology might explain some of the core symptoms of major depressive disorder.
Sounds good to me. So remember those cytokines, those little messengers in your immune system. Well, research is showing that certain ones, like IL-1 and TNF-A, can actually interfere with how neurotransmitters work.
Wait, really? You mean inflammation can actually mess with our brain chemistry?
That's what the research is suggesting, yeah. These cytokines can actually get in the way of how serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine are made and used in the brain. All those key chemicals that regulate mood.
So it's not just about having low levels of serotonin then. Inflammation could be blocking the serotonin that's already there from doing its job.
Exactly. And this could explain why some people don't respond as well to, say, the typical antidepressants.
How so?
Well, most antidepressants mainly focus on just increasing serotonin levels.
Right.
But if the problem is actually inflammation blocking the serotonin signals, just having more serotonin might not be the solution.
Whoa, that's a huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
It suggests that for some people, to really help with depression, you might need to tackle the inflammation directly. This ebook is really blowing my mind.
It is pretty fascinating, isn't it? And the ebook goes even deeper into this whole thing. Remember tryptophan? We were talking about how it's the building block for serotonin?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that chronic inflammation can deplete your body's tryptophan levels.
So it's like a double whammy then. Inflammation messes with the serotonin we do have, and it steals away the stuff our bodies need to make more serotonin.
You got it. There's this enzyme called IDO. It's the one that breaks down tryptophan.
Okay, so inflammation activates this IDO enzyme, and then it goes and gobbles up our precious tryptophan.
Exactly. And when tryptophan levels go down, so does serotonin production. And of course, that can make depressive symptoms even worse.
Wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But what about the HPA axis, that stress response system? How does that all play into this?
Well, the HPA axis is really all about how our bodies handle stress. When we're stressed, it releases cortisol, that hormone that helps us deal with tough situations.
Right. Cortisol is like our fight or flight fuel, right?
Exactly. But the problem is when we're constantly stressed out, that cortisol just keeps pumping. And when you have chronically high levels of cortisol, it can actually trigger inflammation.
It's like that vicious cycle again. Stress leads to cortisol, cortisol leads to inflammation, inflammation makes depression worse. It's a never-ending loop.
Precisely. And to make things even more complicated, the ebook points out that chronic inflammation can actually mess up the HPA axis itself, making it even more sensitive and more likely to overreact.
Oh man, so it's like one system gets knocked off balance and then it just sets off this chain reaction throughout the whole body.
That's a great way to put it. And this whole complex interplay between the immune system, neurotransmitters, and the HPA axis, well, it could be at the root of a lot of the symptoms we see in major depressive disorder.
So the ebook is basically suggesting that if we can figure out how to target inflammation and get those systems back in balance, it could be key to effectively treating depression.
That's the really exciting part. Of course, we still need more research to understand all the details and come up with more targeted therapies.
Sure.
But the psychoneuroimmunologist approach definitely offers a whole new way of thinking about depression and how to approach treatment.
I'm already feeling a bit more hopeful just hearing about it.
Yeah.
It's empowering to think that there might be other ways to heal besides just relying on antidepressants.
I agree. And it really highlights how important it is to take care of both our mental and physical health. They're way more connected than we often realize.
This deep dive has really been eye-opening for me. I'm so glad we're exploring these new ideas. But I am curious, what else does the ebook have to say about how this psychoneuroimmunologic idea explains those specific symptoms we see in major depressive disorder. I
Mm.
mean, things like fatigue, problems concentrating, the changes in appetite and sleep.
Great questions. And the ebook actually offers some pretty fascinating insights into those very symptoms. Let's start with fatigue. Remember we were talking about cytokines and how they're involved in inflammation?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out those cytokines can directly affect our energy levels.
So it's not just in our heads then, like a mental feeling of being tired.
Yeah.
Our bodies are actually running low on power because of the inflammation.
Exactly. When your body is constantly fighting inflammation, it uses up a lot of energy. And that leaves you feeling drained, even if you haven't really done anything physically demanding.
You know, that makes so much sense. I've always wondered why I could sleep for like 10 hours
Yeah.
and still wake up feeling completely exhausted. It's like my body's working overtime even when I'm supposed to be resting.
It's not just about sleep, though. It's about your body's resources being directed towards fighting that inflammation.
Okay.
And this can also help explain why people with depression often have trouble concentrating.
I can see how all that inflammation would make it tough to think straight.
Right. It's not just a feeling. Cytokines can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and affect how our brains actually work.
No way.
Yes. They can interfere with the neurons, disrupt communication between different parts of the brain, and even impair the formation of new memories.
Whoa. So inflammation is literally messing with our brain wiring.
You could say that. And this disruption in brain function can make it really hard to focus, concentrate, process information.
It's no wonder it's so hard to, like, make decisions or remember things when you're depressed. It's like you're trying to think through this thick fog in your brain.
Exactly. Now let's tackle those changes in appetite and sleep. Remember the HPA axis, our stress response system?
Yeah.
Well, that also plays a key role in regulating when we sleep and how hungry we feel.
Okay, so when the HPA axis is out of whack, it can really mess with our eating and sleeping patterns.
Precisely. Chronic stress and an overactive HPA axis can lead to imbalances in cortisol throughout the day.
So instead of having a natural rise and fall of cortisol that helps us wake up in the morning and wind down at night, it's all over the place.
Yep. And that messed up cortisol rhythm can make it really hard to fall asleep, stay asleep, or wake up feeling refreshed. It can also mess with our hunger signals, leading to either overeating or not eating enough.
It's like our body's internal clock is completely out of sync.
Exactly. And remember how we were talking about inflammation affecting the HPA axis? Well, this is where it gets even more complicated. It can create a vicious cycle where both systems just keep disrupting each other.
Oh, man. So it's this perfect storm of factors that all come together to create those really common symptoms of depression.
You got it. The psychoneuroimmunology approach helps us understand how all these seemingly separate symptoms are actually connected through the interplay of the immune system, neurotransmitters, and the HPA axis.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit, it's a lot to take in. Is there a way we can simplify this whole psychoneuroimmunology thing? I'm a pretty visual learner, so maybe an analogy would help.
Absolutely. Think of it this way. Your body is like a car. Your immune system is the engine, neurotransmitters are the fuel, and the HPA axis is the driver. When everything is running smoothly, the car runs perfectly.
Okay, I like this. So what happens when depression throws a wrench in the works?
When depression hits, it's like someone threw sand in the engine, watered down the fuel, and gave the driver confusing directions.
Okay, I think I'm getting the picture here. So the sand represents inflammation messing with the immune system.
Exactly. It disrupts how well the immune system works, just like sand would clog up a car engine.
And the watered-down fuel represents the disruption in how our neurotransmitters work.
Precisely. Inflammation can make key neurotransmitters, like serotonin, less effective, just like watered-down fuel would reduce a car's power.
And the confused driver, that's our dysregulated HPA axis.
You got it. Chronic stress and inflammation throw the HPA axis off balance, just like a confused driver would make erratic turns and get lost.
That is such a good analogy. It makes the whole psychoneuroimmunology approach so much easier to understand. So to effectively treat depression, we need to clean out the sand, replenish the fuel, and give the driver a clear map.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. Addressing inflammation, restoring neurotransmitter balance, and regulating the HPA axis are all key pieces of a holistic approach to treating depression.
It really is a hopeful and empowering perspective. It makes you realize there are lots of ways to approach healing, and that we can really work with our bodies to try and restore balance.
Absolutely. And it emphasizes how important it is to take care of both our mental and physical health, just like taking care of all the parts of our car.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I'm so grateful for this new understanding of how depression works. What else does the ebook go into?
Well, it goes a bit deeper into the specific biomolecules involved in all of this communication between your immune system and brain.
Oh, okay, like what? More about cytokines.
Cytokines are definitely key players, but there are other molecules at work too, like interferon and kynurenine. The ebook gets into the nitty-gritty of how these act as messengers between the two systems.
Lay it on me. I'm ready to hear more about these molecular messengers. So we're talking about these tiny little messengers zipping back and forth between the immune system and the brain. What exactly are interferon and kynurenine? And what kind of messages are they carrying?
Well, interferon is interesting because it's technically a cytokine, but it also acts as an antiviral and anti-tumor agent. So it's kind of like the immune system's special forces unit.
Okay, ready to fight off infections and keep things in check.
Exactly. But the ebook points out that even the good guys can cause problems if they're constantly on high alert. Yeah. If interferon is activated for too long, it can actually lead to inflammation and even damage brain cells.
Wow, so it's like having a superhero who's maybe a little too enthusiastic about their job and ends up causing some collateral damage.
That's a great way to put it. It's all about balance, right? The
Yeah.
immune system needs to be able to respond to threats, but it also needs to know when to stand down.
Makes sense. So what about this kynurenine molecule? What's its role in this whole communication network?
Well, kynurenine is actually a metabolite of tryptophan.
Ah, so it's connected to that feel-good chemical we were talking about before.
It is. And here's where things get really interesting. When your body breaks down tryptophan, it can actually go down two different paths.
Okay.
One path leads to serotonin production, but the other path leads to the production of kynurenine.
So it's like tryptophan is at a fork in the road, and it can either go through its happiness or towards kynurenine.
Exactly. And guess what can influence which path tryptophan takes?
Inflammation.
You got it. Inflammation can shift the balance, pushing tryptophan down the kynurenine pathway and away from the serotonin pathway.
Ugh. So not only is inflammation messing with the serotonin we do have, but it's also preventing our bodies from making more in the first place.
Pretty much, yeah. And to make things even more complex, kynurenine itself can actually be both good and bad for the brain. It just depends on what specific kynurenine metabolites are made in the process.
Okay, hold on, metabolites. Now we're getting into some serious science here.
I know, it's a lot to keep track of, but bear with me because this part is really important for understanding depression. One of the kynurenine metabolites is called kynurenic acid, and it actually has neuroprotective properties,
Neuroprotective
meaning it can help protect brain cells from damage.
so it's like a little bodyguard for our neurons.
Exactly. But here's the catch. There's another kynurenine metabolite called quinolinic acid, and this one is actually neurotoxic.
Neurotoxic.
Uh-huh.
So it can actually damage brain cells.
That's right. So it's kind of like a kynurenine Jekyll and Hyde situation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
And to make things even more complicated, you guessed it, inflammation can tip the scales in favor of producing more of that harmful quinolinic acid.
Oh, man. So inflammation is not only stopping tryptophan from becoming serotonin, but it's also pushing it towards becoming this other thing that can actually hurt our brains. Talk about kicking us while we're down.
It's a complicated system for sure, but that's why this psychoneuroimmunology's approach is so interesting. It helps us see all these different pieces that might contribute to depression.
I mean, it's mind-blowing, really. So is there anything we can do about this? Can we, like, shift the balance back towards the good kynurenine metabolite and away from the bad one?
That's a great question, and it's something that scientists are actively researching right now. They're looking at ways to inhibit the production of quinolinic acid and boost the production of kynurenic acid.
That's really promising. So maybe someday we'll have treatments that specifically target that kynurenine pathway.
It's definitely a possibility. And it actually ties into another interesting point that this ebook makes about diagnosis. It suggests that, because of this whole mind-body connection, we might be able to use biomarkers to get a clearer picture of what's going on with someone's depression.
Biomarkers, like what? You mean a blood test that could show us if someone has inflammation that might be contributing to their depression?
Exactly. By measuring things like cytokine levels, hormone levels, and even specific gene expression patterns, we could get a much more detailed understanding of the underlying biological processes at play in their depression.
That would be amazing. It would allow for much more personalized treatment approaches, right?
Right. Instead of just going by symptoms and hoping for the best, doctors could actually tailor treatments based on a person's individual biology.
It's like the difference between taking a shot in the dark and, using a precision-guided missile.
Exactly. This kind of personalized medicine has the potential to totally change how we approach mental health care.
This is all so exciting. It feels like we're really on the edge of something big in terms of how we understand and treat depression. But I also know that science takes time, and there are always challenges along the way. What are some of the limitations or hurdles that researchers are facing with this whole psychoneuroimmunology approach?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is just the complexity of the immune system itself. It's a super intricate network with so many different players interacting in countless ways, and we're still figuring out all the details.
It's like trying to map an entire universe, but it's happening inside our bodies.
That's a good way to put it. And on top of that, everyone's immune system is unique.
Of course.
I mean, things like genetics, lifestyle, even past experiences can all influence how our immune systems react to things.
So that means there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to treating depression that's related to inflammation.
Unfortunately, no. That's why this idea of personalized medicine is so important. We need to move away from searching for a magic pill that works for everyone and start developing treatments that really cater to each person's unique biology and experiences.
Makes sense. It's a good reminder that we're all unique individuals, and our mental health journeys are going to be unique too.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that science takes time. Psychoneuroimmunology is definitely a promising area of research, but we're still in the early stages of understanding all of its implications.
It's like we open this amazing new door, and now we get to explore all these incredible possibilities that lie beyond it.
That's a beautiful way to put it. This has been quite the deep dive, hasn't it?
It really has. I feel like we've learned so much today. So before we wrap things up, do you have any final takeaways or practical tips for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is this: our minds and bodies are profoundly interconnected. So taking care of your physical health through things like exercise, sleep, a healthy diet, those things can have a huge positive impact on your mental well-being.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And on the flip side, finding healthy ways to manage stress, like mindfulness or spending time in nature, those can make a world of difference too.
Those are great reminders. It's so easy to get caught up in the busyness of life and forget to take care of ourselves.
It really is. But even small changes can make a big difference. And if you are struggling with depression, please remember you are not alone. There is help available, and there is hope.
That is so important to remember. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. This has been a truly enlightening deep dive.
My pleasure. It's always great to talk about this stuff.
Well, that wraps up our exploration of psychoneuroimmunology and depression. I hope you all found this as fascinating and empowering as I have. Understanding the connection between our minds and bodies can really open up a whole new world of possibilities for healing and well-being. So thank you all for joining us on this incredible journey. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and take good care of yourselves.
That's a wrap for today's episode. I hope you picked up some new words and sharpened your listening skills. Don't forget to review your notes and try using the new vocabulary in real conversations. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep learning and keep listening. Bye-bye.